Hey everyone, welcome to the Makerspace. Going to do a very quick overview on our soldering stations and a super basic intro on how to solder circuit components. So in front of us we have the standard soldering station that we have in the Makerspace. A couple things to know here. One, we have tip cleaner, which is in the container here. We have our soldering iron, which goes in the rack on the left-hand side. We have an abrasive gold tip cleaner in the bin here, and on the right we have a reel of solder. On this unit we have an on button. Just remember to turn this unit off when you are done using it. And the set point for the temperature is on the bottom of the screen. For lead-free solder, which is what we have to use here in the Makerspace, the set point is typically around 700 degrees. One thing to note, a couple upfront safety things. Lead-free solder, while much safer to handle, the fumes are not very good for you. So in fact, they're quite harmful. So we have a fume extraction unit. This is a HEPA fume extractor. It has a HEPA filter in the back and an air inlet in the front. So when you start soldering, and I will demonstrate this, you want to pull this unit pretty close to where you're working and turn it on using the button on the top of the unit. And you want to make sure there is good airflow to pull the soldering fumes away from you. You also want to be wearing eye protection. Eye protection is critical. You can get a small little bubble of solder that can explode, and you certainly don't want hot molten solder going into your eye. A couple housekeeping things here. The tip of the soldering iron, its quality is very important to getting a good solder. You do not ever want to grind this or sand this. You only want to clean it using the gold tip cleaner here and the tip tinner here. So when you take this out, you want to check that the chip is shiny. If it's not shiny and it's dull, once the soldering iron has gotten up to temperature, the tip should be clean, so you can rub it on this tip cleaner to get any particulate off of it, so that it looks just like that. And then you can put it into the tip tinner, which will give it a coating of solder-like material on there that helps heat conduct. One thing that's important to know is that soldering is all about transferring heat. You want to transfer heat from the soldering iron to what you are soldering. So let's take a look at how the fume extraction works. So you turn this on and you bring it close to where you are working. And I'm going to just get a small piece of solder. Okay. And you should hear that the fan ramp up. And I'm just going to melt this solder, and you should see the fumes go away from you, okay? If you're not seeing that when you're soldering, then you might be inhaling these fumes, and those are dangerous for you. So make sure that you turn this fume extraction unit on before you solder, you turn it off when you're done, and you get it close to the area that you're working. So now we have a few things around the space that can help you hold things you're soldering. We have helping hands like this unit. We have other helping hands units like that. And some larger ones like this. So you can use these units to hold things together that you are soldering. I'm going to grab a resistor just to show you how to solder one of these. So we have a small demonstration soldering board here, and when you solder things, you want to look at the pads on the circuit board. They should be clean. So they should be relatively shiny, as you can see kind of in the picture here. And they should be free of debris. You could try wiping them. But you could also use a flux to clean them. Although if you have a modern circuit board that the pads are not exposed copper, if they're like this, if they're silver or gold, you probably don't need a flux to solder very well. But if you have copper pads, you might want to use a flux pen to put a little bit of flux on there. I would gravitate towards not doing that until you try soldering on it first. Because a lot of times with these modern solders, especially the solder that we have stocked in the Makerspace, there is a flux built into the solder, so you should not need much flux to solder with it. So when you want to solder a component together onto a circuit board, you'll place it into the board. You should find some way to hold it in there. Sometimes that is just bending the leads a little bit so that it retains itself. Sometimes you could tape it there or place it up against something. And you can use a unit like these helping hands to hold the circuit board if you want. And the name of the game in soldering is temperature control. You do not want to overly heat up a component. You know, a component that goes on your board, if you get that component itself to several hundred degrees, you could damage it. So you want to probably practice your soldering on cheap components like resistors, and you do not want to spend a lot of time soldering each component. And you also typically do not want to melt the solder on the soldering tip itself. So you should be able to place the soldering iron on the lead. So I'm going to place the soldering iron on the back part of the lead, and I'm going to put solder in from the front. So the soldering iron is going to be touching the back of the lead, and my solder is going to touch the front of the lead. And as long as I have gotten the lead up to enough temperature, the solder should melt on the lead and not on the soldering iron. And that means that I've heated the lead up. And actually, my soldering iron has cooled down because I haven't used it in a while. So I'm going to go over there real quick. I touch one of the buttons, and the soldering iron will heat back up. As you can see right now, it's down at in the 4s. We typically want this in the low 700s for lead-free solders. So to do this, we're just going to place the soldering iron on the back of the lead, and on the opposite side of the lead, we're going to melt the solder, and it should melt just a little bit of solder. And again, we want our fume extraction on so that the fumes get pulled away from us and into the fume extraction unit. So we put the soldering iron on one side, melt the solder on the other, just a little bit of solder, and pull away. And you should see a nice little, what we call a meniscus around the soldering iron. So there's good examples of how to do this on the boards behind these soldering stations. And if you have any problems, just ask a Makerspace staff member. So the real take-home messages are: keep your soldering iron clean and at a proper temperature, use fume extraction, and make sure the things you're trying to solder are clean and that they're held safely, and make sure you're wearing eye protection. Thanks very much.